Good evening. Kathy Beatty here, Divorce Support Anonymous Facebook Live. It's always a little tricky to get my music and to cut off, and I have not conquered it yet. But I'm glad that you're joining me tonight for a rather difficult topic. Before we get into the topic, I of course want you to know just a couple of things. You have the opportunity to ask a question, call in, text me at the phone number you see there, and create some conversation if you would like. So tonight's topic is not an easy one, not an easy one at all. In fact, I had a wonderful conversation with a very dear friend of mine who is a therapist. And I was talking with her, Beth Bolthouse, and you'll hear her in a future interview, and you've heard her before in the past on different topics. So she is a therapist on grief. And I was talking with her, and I said, I don't want to get into this rut of saying, okay, here's your problem, and this is what you need to do to fix it. And it's very easy being a divorce coach to do that. I am not a therapist. I am a divorce coach. I'm a domestic mediator. I'm a facilitator and leader of groups. My education is in counseling, but I'm not a therapist. So I wanted that conversation to kind of put me in check, because I never want to be one of those people, because you're hearing it already. You're hearing people say, well, here's your problem and here's what you need to do about it. And you know how hurtful that actually is when people minimize or package your very complicated pain. So that led really to my thoughts of what my topic was going to be tonight, and how do I help you to know that I know not only give you information and tools, but I get it. And I hear you, as I have heard hundreds of people tell their story of what they are going through. And humiliation is one of those emotions, states that we find ourselves in. So I wanted to share and be a little vulnerable. I know in my book, the first book, the white one there, I tell my story. I tell parts of my story. There certainly are parts that I do not include in there. But I tell sometimes in the group if I feel that it will relate to them. So I want to share just a little bit of a story that happened to me, and it has to do certainly with humiliation. I was going through the divorce. My husband had left. I was sitting at the dinner table with my daughter and my mother, and the phone rang. And so I picked up the phone, of course, during dinner. Never a good idea, but I did. And it was this woman on the phone who decided that she would share with me that she had been sleeping with my husband for the last 6 months. I was, as you can imagine, very shocked, very angry, very much in pain, but I was very humiliated, because I had worked so very hard to raise my children in a Christian home and to protect them and to protect our family. I was humiliated that he would associate with someone of such low integrity or no integrity. But that is one of the stories where I relate to your humiliation, and I have heard your stories. And not only do I want to give you help to deal with it, I also want you to know that on a very real gut level, I understand what you are going through. And I really would like to say, okay, here's the answer, let's just fix it. But I also know that if someone had done that to me when I was in the rawness and the confusion of the divorce, I would have repelled away because I needed what you need is someone to understand what you are going through, someone to understand the humiliation, the embarrassment, the surreal events that have taken place in our lives. And they have been surreal. And they have not been what we planned for. And we have been surprised. We have been angry. We have been embarrassed. And in many places and times, we have been humiliated to where we are ashamed. We feel so degraded. So I want to talk about that topic today because I do want to give you some help to get through that humiliation. Some of you are in the thick of it right now. Some of you have experienced it in the past and still feel and know the effects of it. So I have like 6 points here that I want to talk about, but I want you to know that I understand. Not only from experiencing it, but over the past 15 years, hearing so many stories of humiliation. So let's get started with how do we handle it? Number one is to separate yourself from their actions. Easier said than done. I realize you feel it's such a reflection of you. But at this point, when you get to that point of humiliation, you do need to separate yourself and say, this is their choices, their decisions. It is not my decision. So that separation is going to help us put it into a better perspective. Let them have the responsibility for their decisions, their responsibility for what they have done, realizing it has hurt you. And I also realize we have done some things to humiliate ourselves, and we'll touch on that a little bit. But I want to right now speak on the actions of others to give us that perspective, to separate ourselves from that perspective, from that action that they have done that we feel really bad about. Separate ourselves from their actions because it is what they have done. Now, again, we will talk about the humiliation that we have brought on upon ourselves. And that's going to, well, where do we get to that? It's going to require forgiving ourselves, but we'll touch on that shortly. So point number 2 is I want you to know that you are not alone in this emotion of humiliation, and you need to know that. You need to know that you are not the only one who has gone through this. That's why I love support groups. Because when you hear other people's story and you relate to it, it's like, I am not the only one. I am not the only one who has been totally humiliated by the choices of my spouse. And that helps us to normalize, realizing none of this is normal, but it brings it into, again, a perspective of it's not just me. It's not just me. There are other people's. You need to know that you are not alone in this feeling of isolation. I also want you to know that if you are not talking and sharing this with other people, then you are keeping it as a secret that is really going to burn inside of you. Because secrets intensify our humiliation. They don't calm it or appease it. They intensify. We hold on to it for many, many, many years. We don't want to do that. We want to be able to let go of that humiliation. So we need to be talking about it. I love what Dr. Brene Brown states. Owning our story and loving ourselves through that process is the bravest thing that we will ever do. Owning our story. Yes, it happened to me. The story about the phone call, that happened to me. I have to own that. And I also have to love myself through that process to understand it was wrong what happened to me. It was wrong that this person took it upon themselves to do something so cruel. The next one is don't strike back. Realizing when you're humiliated, you have this defense buildup and you want to lash out, you want to revenge. Don't do it. Don't strike back because you have to live with this story your entire life. Don't strike back. Leave space for God to handle it. Leave space for God to handle it. That which we cannot handle ourselves. And as we speak in the spiritual context, I also want to state that Christ understands humiliation more than you and I ever will. When you consider that experience, and perhaps you don't know that story, but when you consider that experience, there is a humiliation there that none of us could even touch. And yet, in that very process, he was able to say, Father, forgive them. And that is a process. We are human, and I don't expect you nor even think that you could forgive in the middle of humiliation. But I do want you to understand that Christ does relate to this humiliation. And that gives it a perspective as well. The next is don't lose your trust in the world or become cynical. I know that you are experiencing so much right now, and then let's add COVID onto it, right? But you're experiencing the change in all these relationships. You're experiencing this humiliation, points of humiliation, perhaps more than 1, 2, or 3, continual humiliation. You can lose trust in life, in the world, and become cynical. That's only going to hurt you. It's only going to hurt you. This is when you join healthy circles of people, when you find healthy people to attach yourself with, so that you don't lose trust in the world. There are good people in the world. There is good in the world. So don't become cynical. The final one is talk to yourself through this humiliation like you would talk to someone that you love. You wouldn't beat your children up if they went through a humiliation in school or in life. No, you would be so compassionate to them. You would say, I'm so sorry that happened to you. This was just wrong, what has happened to you. I hope you would take care of yourself. Be compassionate to yourself through this humiliation. You didn't deserve it, but it happened. And then if you are one who has done things that has humiliated yourself, I'm going to ask that you really just begin that process of forgiving yourself for it. That you take those actions that cause your humiliation and you begin the process of forgiving yourself to let go of that. It does not define you. It defines some poor judgment, some poor actions, but it does not define you. And so if you have found yourself doing some things that have humiliated you, take the time to be compassionate to yourself, to forgive yourself, and ask God to join in that forgiveness and allow you that forgiveness. The final statement that I'd like to say is the heaviness of this event is going to fade. Time will pass. It will not be as heavy and as painful as it is right now. But your reaction to it is going to determine how long that it remains. If you don't forgive yourself, if you don't let go, if you continue to try to strike back because you have been embarrassed and humiliated, it's only going to prolong the effects of the humiliation. Divorce seems to come with this awful, awful circumstance of humiliation. Does not define you. I hope these tips have helped you to consider, to give it a different perspective, and to move forward from it, because on the other side of this humiliation and this difficult journey of divorce is your beautiful life. And it is my goal to get you there. Have a great weekend. We will talk throughout the week, I hope. Let me know if I can be of help. And I look forward to seeing you next week on Facebook Live. Thank you, Dee, for your comment. It's something that's happened to many of us. So take care, and we will see you next week. Have a great weekend. Good evening.